Hello, Tungsten Miner here. This time I'm going to walk through what I've gotten done on this building, which as you can see is not quite done, but quite a bit further along. So this you may remember as being that little grassy courtyard. Well, grassy no longer, and certainly more of a courtyard. So what I've done here is mostly chisels and bits. I've continued that edge and brought it down and obviously made some pillars. So this is using Underground Biomes Constructs marble. This is the limestone, and the two of them I think work very nicely together. I decided to keep that square corner there instead of trying to make it round. You remember at one point I'd had this part here extend all the way down to there. And I decided that surface just didn't quite look right. If it was perfectly smooth, it might work, but even with chisels and bits, that round corner looked a little too jagged and pixely, especially when you start looking closely at it. So instead, I took all that out, kept the nice squareness, and added some pillars, which I think add a sense of kind of grandeur to this space, which I like quite a lot. Next up, I filled everything in with gravel, thinking back to a fort I visited in Connecticut, near where I grew up. It was early Revolutionary War fort in the United States, and basically, like the front door was this big entry hallway, a lot like this, and the gravel path that extended way, way, way out off into the distance came right up through the middle of the building and into the courtyard, which was at a level with the pathway. So I decided to keep that element from that fort, and that brings you into this space here. Of course, that's the area that I first started out filling in off on the west side. And then I went all the way around with this last time, and then filled in the courtyard this past time. I've also been doing a lot of work in the outer edges of the building, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But obviously, I've been staring at this fountain this whole time, so let me talk about that before I move on. Obviously, chisels and bits. I used much the same technique, got out picks in, traced out some lines, figured out exactly where the things are going to land. Decided to carve it 3 meters deep and then fill in the bottom meter with marble. And then, let's see, what else? Carved out a little hole there, which goes up through the center, coming up to the top here. And then using the chisels and bits tank, which let me go grab that. Obviously, I've moved all my stuff around. So here's the fluid tank. So basically, you place this thing on the ground, take a bucket of whatever fluid, pop it in there, just the normal way, right-clicking, and that'll fill it up. And then you can use your chisel to right-click on this thing, not left-click, right-click, and it'll drain off the blocks from that whatever fluid it is. And now you've got blocks just like regular chisels and bits blocks. And they behave exactly the same. You can do the same sorts of things with them. You can place them. They don't create flowing water bits. They just stay still. So as I focus on different areas here, you can see it's highlighting the different pieces of the water blocks. And then for the center here, I filled in this pillar, got it above water level, brought it back in a little ways, left a little trench at the top there, and then have the water flowing out. So you can see it covers just the side there, and coming up through the hole in the center. And then here, added a little cap with just a teeny touch of glowstone on the corners and on the top. I was hoping they would light up, but they don't actually, and I was kind of surprised because what I'd read on the Chisels and Bits site made me think that they would, but maybe you need enough of them, or maybe I need to fiddle with the config because I still haven't worked that out. In any case, so now I've got this neat little fountain in the center, but having done that, I found that it was super confusing because I have 4 identical doors and 4 identical directions that are all, well, pretty hard to tell where you're going. And that's what gave me the idea of having these signs. So this door here is from Malasis Door Mod, and it's the carriage door. And the way you make this thing is you take just a plain old vanilla regular oak door and then add 5 blocks of whatever you want the filler to be around the outside edge. And you just drop them on there, just a stack of 5. And that will get recognized and make these carriage doors. And that gives you this guy. So the problem with carriage doors, though, is that they have a width of 3/16. And if you put them here, they're going to want to be on the back corner here, or if you put them on the front, that would kind of work, except I ran into the weirdest bug. I took this door and I placed it so that the doors would open in the opposite direction there, and I placed it on this meter, and then around the corner over here, I had this goofy thing happen. Here, I can actually just show you real quick. Oh, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Gotta use the right tool to break the door or the door doesn't break. And you gotta use the right spot or the door doesn't break. There we go. So now I've taken the carriage door down. If I place it right on this meter and open it up, I can walk around the corner here and I get this goofy phantom block. Obviously, it's not really there. So I don't know what the deal is. And this, you can see Nice bricks, jungle planks. So these, despite the appearances, are the proper kinds of blocks that they ought to be. It's just they somehow look like they've got some weird kind of block there. No idea what's going on. I'm still trying to work it out with the mod author and figure out what's going on. He's asked me to try and reproduce it without any other mods, which is very reasonable. So at some point I'll get around to doing that and we'll try and figure it out together. In the meantime, I decided to put the doors in the other way, added some blocks up there, chisels and bits, to make a kind of sloping pattern that seems to make this 3/16 width a bit more reasonable. And then I added this up here. So up there are chisels and bits blocks that meet up with the top of the door and blend in. So you can't really tell that the door doesn't go all the way to the top there. And then I added just a little bit of a margin, and I added this little panel that sticks out a bit. And then the signs. Okay, so let's go look at the signs in detail here. Oh, let me grab something to stand on. Okay, so what we're looking at, obviously chisels and bits again. I took this, which is, you can see, split over 4 different 1 meter chunks. And having built up this platform is actually 1 meter by 1 meter. I added black granite on the background, which I've been using a bunch, and then I took a gold block and reduced it to bits using the chisel, and then placing 1 bit at a time, I actually went back to Pixin and I picked a font that I liked and typed a capital letter W, and then put all that stuff together there, and then wound up with gold lettering on top, and then repeated the process for each of the other sides. So now I've got all of these different letterings on each of the different sides. And that gives me basically the courtyard. Okay, so let's carry on by talking about the changes outside of this courtyard. Let's change to creative mode so that we can see this a little bit more easily. Alright, so last time I had filled in just this little segment here, but as you can see now, I've gone through and I've filled out all of the walls all throughout the rest of the building, and filled out the floors and filled out the doorways, and of course the windows are going to be floor-to-ceiling windows all the way up and down the entire outside edge of the building. So let me jump down here and we'll look at how these walls work. Okay, so first of all, I've continued this notion of having the walls that go partly through, at least except for those that border the courtyard here. So these are, I think, 11 thick. Yeah, or yeah, you can see here. They come all the way to the edge, and they leave the same margin. But everywhere else, I've left that margin alone. Even in cases where there's a room next to a room, I leave the same margin there. So, in order to make the doorways, depending upon the room, I chose different widths of door just based on what works. Because obviously, a 2 meter wide doorway is going to work here, and something wider is not. And then what I decided to do is to make every doorway arched, but not a perfect 1-to-1 arch. I don't want this to be a 2 meter tall arch. Instead, I made all of the arches 1-to-3 ratio, so the height is 1/3 of the width. And of course the arch is only half of a circle, so the circle is 2/3, but the arch itself is 1/3 the height. So that produces this pattern for here, that produces this pattern, you can see it better over here, for 1 meter wide doors, and for 2 meter wide doors it produces that pattern. Because the walls wind up in the center of a block here, using actual doors kind of doesn't work, because the Minecraft doors and even the Molasses doors want to be on the edge one way or another. And so I'd have to go around and pick all the places and move the walls into one side or another, and I kind of preferred to have the centered walls. Moreover, it's kind of a nuisance to have to be opening and closing doors all the time. So in the end, I decided, you know, let's just go with these archways and we'll just walk through. So you wind up with a bunch of rooms in the different parts of the building of different sizes because, well, you often need rooms of different sizes for different purposes. So here's where I made my initial chunk of the window and then decided I was only going to do that part to start with. So I've got this little extra bit built. But this gives you an idea of how this is going to work for the whole rest of the building. Is every room is going to have one wall, which is a window, at least every external room. And I'll have some of these internal rooms here. And I'm thinking I'll put skylights in these rooms. And I'll have to try and figure out a pattern of skylights that doesn't look weird from the outside of the building. And we'll see what I can come up with. And then this room here is just got doors on like every wall. So I may wind up just leaving this as like a corridor instead of an actual room. We'll see. And then a nice long room here. Oh, that horse. One of the problems with the carriage doors is that they aren't actual doors. That things can go through them if you poke at them just right. So I've had to change that horse, and he keeps getting out of the middle courtyard there. Anyway, so the internal walls come up to the edge here, and what I ultimately am going to do with them is what I've done over here. So you can see how this wall pokes out just a few pips from the glass. So the glass is following the circular line all the way through the center of all these bricks, and they'll all ultimately look like this. And then this is just going to extend out a little bit past them. And the same will be true for this wall, and again for this wall, and so on. So here, this gets into our great big room. One of these great big rooms is going to be dedicated to immersive engineering machinery, and one of them is going to be dedicated to the more high-tech stuff with the high-tech storage system, and maybe to start off with a low-tech storage system. Haven't quite picked which one is which, and I'll need to think through what rooms do I need for what purposes, and which ones do I want to be closer to which other ones. Because in the end, this building is 64 meters across, and it takes a while to walk from one end of the building to the other. So I kind of need to think through what things do I need to be close to what other things in order to not spend all my time walking around from one end of the building to the other. Suffice to say, this end of the building is the large room end of the building. These things. These are polished andesite. So I took andesite, dropped it in the chisel, got the polished version of it, and then used the same pillar pattern I'm using out here, except making them andesite instead so that they fit in with this room a little bit better. Because they're pillars and they're in the center of the room to hold up the ceiling here, I didn't want them to be square. I wanted them to look like they're pillars. And then this ultimately will be a limestone ceiling, so it'll basically have the same appearance as this, except it will extend all the way out to here. And then around the corners here, so obviously I have my smeltery in this room over here. So I'm going to think about like what rooms, what are these rooms for over here, and maybe I'll make one of them the Tinker's Construct room, which has all the rest of the Tinker tools and, you know, stencil table and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know what I'll do with the other one. Something to do with smelting metals or some other thing that uses smelted metals, or I don't know, I'll have to think about it. Like I said, the other big room, which is basically done the same way, is going to be for either storage or for immersive engineering. Haven't quite decided. Or the big immersive engineering rooms. This room here, just a nice long room for something that maybe needs a little bit more space. This one will probably wind up being just a corridor because of all the other things. Oh, you see, this is the same bug with the door. I bet you if I go and break this door... Oh, bugger. Well, anyway, fix that problem. Forgot that I was in creative mode. Well, I'll straighten that out later. Yeah, so where was I going with this? Right. So this will be the other staircase. I'm going to copy that staircase from over there, use the same spiral staircase here. And then some more rooms. I haven't quite decided. But on this side of the building, I decided to give myself some larger rooms. And then over here, some larger rooms still. So I've got my two really big rooms. I've got a set of smallish rooms over there. I've got a set of somewhat bigger rooms over here, and then even bigger rooms over here. So despite the symmetry of the overall building, the quarters of the building actually aren't symmetrical at all. That's not entirely true, I guess. That side and that side are symmetrical. The north and east ends are symmetrical, but the south and west ends are not. Anyway, so that gets you all of that. Up here, I'm going to change these over to the andesite because I like the way that looks a lot better. I wish I had thought of that sooner. And fill in the glass all the way around up here. And I will probably end up putting in some kind of partitions. I haven't quite figured out what that's going to look like exactly. I think at a minimum, I'm going to have some kind of partition go across here. Or maybe a little bit further along. Maybe I'll have a partition that goes across diagonally. Still haven't quite decided. But in the end, I think what I want to do is have this kind of open railing proceed across to here, so that each of the cardinal directions has one of these railings that looks down over the center courtyard, and then maybe glass all the way around the rest of it. And yeah, that second staircase will be over here. That staircase is there. And I've kind of thought about maybe needing another staircase over on this side somewhere. But obviously, if this is the smeltery room, the staircase can't go here. So maybe the smeltery goes over to one of the larger rooms on that side, or maybe smeltery stays here and the staircase goes someplace else. Not quite sure. There kind of is no place else because all of this area up here we can see is mostly taken up, up to about that middle point right there is taken up with that little corner of the courtyard. So that leaves only this little space right here, which is actually part of the wall over there. And that's just not going to be a good place for that. But I do need to think about where that third staircase is going to go, if I'm going to have a third staircase. Because those two are fine, but it might prove to be inconvenient not to have some way to get up over here. So maybe there's a staircase like right here on both of these big rooms. Still more to contemplate. Anyway, this top part here is going to be the same on all four sides. So ultimately, this sort of glass enclosure is going to appear on all the four cardinal directions. And over these big rooms, this area will be a flat limestone roof, and this area will be the raised ceiling like that, and that limestone ceiling will go all the way around that circle there, so that the glass part just extends from here to there over each of the four of them. And then I'll have the limestone roofs over here. I was kind of thinking of having some kind of garden, rooftop garden sort of thing over here. Maybe different flowers, maybe low plants, maybe crops, agricraft crops. Maybe that's something that I wind up automating and using the roof as a place to have that automation. I think last time I talked about the little door I invented to get through the curved area of glass over here. So yeah, lots of thoughts and lots of progress. This is starting to look like an actual building with all the walls in place and the pillars, and a lot more of it is filled out in the actual textures it's going to use rather than filler earth blocks standing around. So yeah, back to work for me. Oh, frame rate. I'd want to talk about frame rate. So you can see here the frame rate is pretty steadily in the 30s, um, even when I'm kind of zoomed out and looking at the whole building. And that's an artifact of running Minecraft in Windows. I have my frame rate capped at about 60. And when I do this with full screen mode, my frame rate roughly doubles. So I get, pegged at around 60 frames per second. So pretty much this entire building, with the exception of the earth blocks that are going to get removed, and the floor, which are all solid blocks, this is pretty much all chisels and bits blocks all the way through. And no substantial or even noticeable really drop in frame rate, even with some transparent blocks. Quite a few transparent blocks if you think about the way Chisel and Bits calculates them. So I am very impressed and very hopeful that what little I have to add to this isn't going to make any substantial difference in my frame rate. And as you can see, even with the frame rate I have, things are pretty smooth and moving very nicely. So I am very excited that that is going to work, or at least it seems to be. Anyway, so I will sign off for this time. If you like the video, go ahead and hit like. If you want to know when the next video is ready, hit subscribe, and I will talk to you later.